But all we can do is throw a flower on the water, look for the sun through the rain. Lay a little frangipani gentle on the water, remember how we loved you. Chapter 32. Lay a little frangipani gentle on the water. 88 Australians were killed in an attack on the tourist district of Kuta in Bali on the 12th of October 2002. The nightclub bombing killed 202 people and a further 240 were injured. Australians were deeply affected. This was terrorism so close to home. I was deeply honoured when Prime Minister John Howard invited me to sing Waltzing Matilda at the first Bali Memorial Service. Being a great rugby union follower, he was well aware of my performances of the song at the World Cup in '98, and I'd met him on a number of other occasions, including Sir Donald Bradman's memorial service. I must admit I wasn't sure if it was the right song for the occasion, but there I was, off to Bali in the Prime Minister's private plane with Phil Matthews. John and Jeanette Howard had their private room. Behind them sat the leader of the opposition, Simon Crean, and his wife Carol, the Prime Ministerial Doctor, the staff, Phil and me. Behind us in the next section were various Air Force personnel. I didn't see much of them until I attempted to take a photo of the television screen that showed how the aircraft deliberately flew around one side of Uluru so the Prime Minister could see it. I thought that was amusing, as the picture showed an exaggerated flight path. That's when I was abruptly interrupted. It was entirely inappropriate for security reasons for anyone to take photos of the interior of the Prime Minister's plane. It was all a bit embarrassing, but it gave the officer a chance to show me who was boss on the plane. I was humbled, but surprised. Simon Crean thought it was a bit over the top. I didn't really mind. It gave me something to talk about later on. It was a bit cheeky, I suppose, but I asked the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff whether I could spend a moment with Mr. and Mrs. Howard just to say thank you for the invitation to join them on such a journey. John Howard offered me a scotch and I spent about 20 minutes in their cabin. One of the things he asked me was, "How's Slim?" I was a bit lost for words with that question. It implied I knew Slim well, which I didn't. I was certainly encouraged by his success in singing all Australian material, and I absolutely respected his standing in the industry. So I said, well, to be quite honest, I don't know how Slim is. He was never very encouraging toward me. The Prime Minister's immediate response was, how's Lee Kernaghan? I'm sure that he was subtly suggesting that perhaps I didn't encourage Lee either. I guess politicians know about competition more than anyone else. On our first night in Bali, Phil and I shared a dinner table with Simon and Carol Crean. I found them to be very amiable people. Carol Crean struck me as not being at all interested in politics and probably kept Simon firmly rooted in the real world. When I got to know Simon better, I thought he was too down to earth to become a Prime Minister. It's a very tough game. The following morning, we were taken to do a sound check at Garuda Wisnu Kankana Cultural Park, a limestone quarry used as an outdoor amphitheatre where the Balinese had left huge pillars of limestones like the ruins of an ancient building. High above and behind the stage was an enormous stone phoenix, the Garuda, dinosaur-sized. As the crowd of mourners gathered, they laid candles and frangipani on the man-made pond in the foreground. I can't help feeling others' grief at funerals, so I kept out of sight and focused on my job ahead. I don't recall much of the service. I was still unsure that Waltzing Matilda would be appropriate, but it was the Prime Minister's choice, and so that was that. You couldn't help but feel the overwhelming grief of people fighting to control their emotions during the ceremony. The time finally came for me to sing at the conclusion of the ceremony, and that's when their tears flowed like a river. There are not many songs that evoke the essence of our country quite as much as Waltzing Matilda. When we hear the words Coolabah, Billabong, Billy Boiled and Jumbuck, it spells out so sweetly how unique our country is. On this occasion, it brought the spirit of Australia into that Asian scene, as though it had come to take the souls of the Australian victims back home. That's how it felt to the families that day, and they were most grateful to me. In turn, I was grateful to John Howard for having such foresight. Before we left the quarry, I sang a few more songs to help lift their spirits during the tea and refreshments that were served after the service. After the ceremony, we were quickly whisked away in the official cars. Every street corner had 2 or 3 Indonesian policemen stopping the traffic to let us through. At great speed, the cars headed for Kuta Beach. It felt like I was in a movie scene. Once the Prime Minister arrived at the beach, another ceremony started. This time it was Balinese style. Canoes filled with pink bougainvillea flowers were paddled out to sea, and the flowers were scattered on the water. Aussie surfers also carried the flowers on their surfboards. It couldn't have been more appropriate. The beach was the reason so many Aussies came to Bali in the first place, and of course to experience the gracious Balinese hospitality. I could feel the healing process had begun. It was inspirational. After this ceremony, the official party was invited to walk past the wreaths, flowers, and photos of the victims at the bomb site at the Sari Club. It was here that I read 4 lines next to a photo and felt that nothing better could be said. To hear your voice, to see you smile, to sit and talk to you a while, that would be our greatest wish today. I thought to myself, that's the beginning of a song. With all the things in my mind on that sad day, I could feel that this was just the start. Hence, Flower on the Water was written. It was first released on the Chandelier of Stars album, but it's also on In Symphony, the album I recorded with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra at the Sydney Opera House. The song has struck a chord not only with the families of the victims from the Bali bombings, but it is often used at funerals generally. Hardly a week goes by without an email about that song or True Blue being used at a friend's or family member's funeral. I'm deeply touched and honoured that my songs can help people in times of sorrow. 10 years after the bombings, in October 2012, Prime Minister Julia Gillard invited me back to sing Flower on the Water at the 10th anniversary memorial service, again at the same limestone quarry in Bali. Once again, the ability to write a song gave me the opportunity to share in the emotions of Australian families and left me with precious memories. I am indeed blessed. Over the years, I've met John Howard many times, as I did again in Bali in October 2012, and we always have a jovial chat. The first time I met him was at the Lodge in 1988, when he was the leader of the opposition and Bob Hawke was the incumbent Prime Minister. Bob and Hazel Hawke had invited a good number of people to celebrate New Year's Eve. The guests were all lined up in the garden to shake Bob's hand, and when it came to my turn, Hazel had to tell Bob who I was. She said, "You know Bob, True Blue." "Ah, yeah," he said, and didn't even look me in the eye. This was after I'd sung True Blue on 3 separate occasions in the same week, with Bob and Hazel in the front row to launch the Buy Australian campaign in Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. However, when I was introduced to John Howard, it was with a firm handshake and a real eye-to-eye contact. Aussies don't forget these things, eh? But don't get the idea that I vote Liberal or Labor or Green. I decide who gets my vote each election.